Hey everybody, and welcome to the D&D podcast. Today I have a story about the time I had a modern day setting D&D one shot. Now, if you're not very familiar, there are some modern day rules that can be applied to D&D if you want to set your campaign or your one shot in modern day. Although obviously it's not exactly like modern day, there are some alterations like kobolds are still a thing. Now, up to this point, we had only played a few campaigns and I was still with my original group. We had played Tomb of Annihilation, we were in Curse of Strahd. We hadn't started Waterdeep yet, though I don't know if I had started DMing at this point. So I was a player in this one shot. We all had to make our characters together, which was actually the first time we did this, with the exception of when we started Tomb of Annihilation and there was an entire session dedicated to how to make your character, since we were all very new to the game. Now, when we all arrived, well, for the first session at least, not for the character creation, there is something I should mention about the character creation first. Now, I was playing with people that I've played with plenty of times before, and up to this point, I had been just like the big muscly guy, and that I hadn't really played much else besides that. And my other friends pointed that out to me. So I decided to kind of double back and do the complete opposite to prove to myself and them that I could do more than just, the big barbarian who doesn't take no for an answer. So, first of all, I switched from male to female. Second, I went from the big strong class into a class that's more technical. I'll get into the classes about the modern campaign in a second, or the modern module. It's not really a module, but it's a rule list. And I made a few other differences too, but those were the main two. Just to, prove to them and myself I could do more than just the stereotype that I had set for myself at that point. Now, the classes in this modern module are very different from regular, because instead of being set around like a type of character that we would be familiar with from, say, fantasy, say a wizard or a fighter, instead of being set around that, they're more set around a certain stat. Like you're the strong hero, the fast hero. And then after that, it gets more into the more specifics about, say, would you like to have the soldier background? Or would you like to have the student background? And then eventually you choose basically what kind of... Even though the classes are built around the stats, you can then choose like a more specific thing you want to do. And I had to ask my DM if I can make a homebrew one, because I did have an idea for a good character. If any of you are familiar with the video game Yandere Simulator, you know that there's a person named Info Chan. And I just wanted to basically make her, because I wanted to be the hacker of the group. Just, the person in the background. I don't do much fighting, but I provide a lot of support. My DM said, okay, if you want to do that, there's not really a hacker class currently. So if you want to homebrew it, let me take a look at it. I'll see if it works or not. I say, okay. I showed up the next day. Or it was 2 days later, because I had never homebrewed a class before. And basically, I made a combination of Aiden Pierce and Marcus from Watch Dogs 1 and 2. How they start out with a little bit. Well, actually, they start out with pretty much nothing that those two have, but then they work up their way to what Marcus would have, essentially. The DM signed off on it because, if anything, the power it was a little bit weaker than he was expecting. So he signed off on that, and I was now the hacker of the group. This story starts out, though, when in the first session, we all arrived. My name, I chose the name Sayori from a name generator. I was with Roderick, a man named Rick, and a kobold named Gerger. He was the only person playing a non-human character, and it was kind of funny because we were all playing high school students, but he wanted to play a 40-year-old man. So it was a little interesting of how he kind of got worked into this, but the GM made it work because he was pretty good at that. Now, we were all basically at a mall, eating like a Wetzel's pretzel or something like that, just hanging out, but we were there for a reason. We had heard rumors about pet kidnappings. Now, these kidnappings had been mostly of the more exotic type. Although some dogs and cats were being kidnapped, it was more lizards and birds. Interesting types of things that people really don't advertise that they have. It was very strange why they were going missing. So we were all hanging out at this mall area because we have a tip. There's an informant we know. Though his name escapes me, I shall just call him William. Now, William was a werewolf, and he and the other werewolves were essentially like the Italian mob of this world. But we were friends with him before he was a part of the family business. So he trusted us, and we trusted him. We asked him for a favor. Basically, we wanted to be inside of, say, the stronghold that they have in this particular area, and ask if any of them knew anything about these pets, and somehow get an honest answer. Now, Rick had silver on him, just to be safe, and the GM warned him that, keep in mind, if you take out this silver, that's the equivalent to these people of taking out a grenade. So be very careful if you decide to reveal that, because that would probably immediately be an initiative roll. He kept that in mind. So, we finally meet up with him. Well, it was Rick that met up with him. The rest of us stayed back initially. Rick explained the situation to him, and he was a little bit nervous to do this for us because he was still fairly new into the mob. He doesn't have any power. He was almost equivalent to an intern. And he didn't really know how much, if at all, he could help us. As he was wondering this, Roderick came up to him, and he tried to help convince him to take them back to where their hideout is. Eventually, they agreed to do it. I decided to stay back and watch through the security cameras. But eventually, the feed rang out, and I could only communicate them through a walkie-talkie that they had taped down, well, like the button to talk taped down, so I could always hear. Now, as they got back, it got a little bit complicated because they could kind of smell the silver that Rick had on him. They were very familiar with it because it's one of the few things that can actually hurt them. And they weren't too happy about it. They tried to question them, though they didn't seem to know much. And they weren't happy with William at all for bringing them back here. We may have gotten him in some serious trouble that we hadn't intended on doing. Though we weren't sure if they knew anything. Even if they did, they weren't going to tell us anything. But we kind of concluded with a couple of insight checks that they actually didn't know anything. While it was a little bit more complicated than that, but that's the best way I could sum it up. Because immediately after this, there was a massive explosion in a pet store. I was the closest to it, so I ran towards it. And we see a couple of goblins running out with some pets in cages, some of which survived the explosion. Once again, they were of the more exotic type. I charged at them, but they cast a spell to make massive vines grow and give me disadvantage on it. The GM made me make a roll a dex check to see if I could get through them without tripping and falling, or even just slowing me down because I was running at full speed. I failed the check, so I was slowed down heavily. Now, the others were running out too, and they tried to come as well. Surprisingly, Roderick, he could run, and he was not fazed by these vines, although they had gotten bigger by the time he got there. He charged right through them and was ahead of me. He was so close to catching the goblins in their van, which they were just loading the pets into. But they hit the gas, and they got away. This is actually the first time we realized how far in D&D movement really takes you. Because it's like, 30 feet every 6 seconds. That's not going to be the 70 miles an hour that a car can drive at when it's trying to get away from people. But we still tried one thing. Rick and we had worked together many times before, and Roderick kind of just owed us a favor, so that's why he was there. But Rick and I had shared a gun because we could only afford one between the two of us since we were poor high school students. When the Kobold would join, Gerger, he would have a sniper rifle. Well, he said he wanted to have a sniper rifle. It turned out the game just gave him a regular gun because a sniper rifle was too powerful for what we were doing. But, he was a 40-year-old man, or the equivalent of in human years. So, Rick had the gun, since he was in the dangerous situation. So he shot at the tires. The GM describes how we barely skim one of the tires, but they don't slow down even though that happens. We felt like we had failed. So, we decided to get out of there before anyone sees that we brought a gun to a mall, and we see, some of the maintenance and police trying to get rid of these giant vines. So we all decided to go home and meet back at school tomorrow. The next day, we all arrive at school, and we know that we're going to need some help to find out anything about this. So we consult two people that we know, Jessica Taylor and Jack Ryder. Now, Jessica Taylor, she was basically a mystic, or more like somewhere between a mystic and a warlock. Basically, they believed that magic was something not to be obtained, but something provided. Something not taken, but not something learned. It's something almost natural. While Jack Ryder was just straight up a wizard, and he believed that magic has to be learned. There's no being born with it like a sorcerer, which apparently isn't a thing anymore. And you have to study it. Otherwise, you will never be able to do it. And they always had conflicts with each other. They were basically two school organizations that didn't like each other. Yeah, although there was rumors that Jessica Taylor and Jack Ryder had gone several gates before. There were actually no proof of that, and they would always deny it when they were asked about it. Eventually, we got the two of them in the same room because they were pretty good at tracking things. So we took them back to the mall, and we asked them to please help us track where these goblins had driven off to, because we need to find out where. They were so angry that we had tricked them both into coming to the same place at the same time under peaceful circumstances. They did nothing but scowl at each other. Somehow I was able to mediate them, though, with intimidation. I was able to just basically, slam the table and say, listen, you two are going to work together and you're going to help us figure this out, so help me. And somehow that actually worked. Only, obviously, I yelled it angrily. They eventually said, yes, we'll help. And when they went outside, well, first they took a part of the vine and see if they could do anything with that. Then they went outside and found a very small part of a skid mark that remained. And somehow, I don't know how, because there is no magic that really allows this, but DM plot points, I guess. They kind of combined their magic into a tracking spell. We did have a tracker with us at the time, and somehow we just got a blip. And we kind of knew where this area was. It was kind of in a bad part of town, but we know we had to go there anyway. So we thanked them and we asked them if they want to come with us and end this. They weren't happy being together at all, so they immediately declined. And it was just us again. Not too long after, we met up with a kobold who was just kind of chilling. The player arrived a little bit late, so at this part of the story, he finally introduced himself. He was just kind of hanging out, and he said he saw what happened the other day and how we tried to stop the goblins, and how he was a bit racist towards the goblins and offered to help us. We accepted only because we needed the extra manpower, or in this case, kobold power. And that's when he joined us. We all decided to get in our cars and drive to where it was, where the tracker was. Now, there was a long-running joke. I made the joke saying, since I have enough to afford this gun, I want the crappiest car that there is. Because Rick actually didn't have a car. But I say I want the crappiest thing that we can ever think of. If there's anything wrong that we could possibly think of a car having without it actually being completely broken, we want it. So it was like a beat up shell of a car, essentially, that barely ran. We had the jokes that the headlights turned on, but only if I jammed the gas and the emergency brake at the same time. If I ever want to stop the car, I have to hold the brakes about 5 minutes before I actually want to come to a complete stop. To do a turn signal, the turn signal just didn't work. I had to stick my arm out the window and do that thing you're supposed to do if you can't signal. The seats, they were basically just metal spheres, essentially. Well, not spheres, just metal circles. There was so much wrong with this car. The others had, actually used cars that aren't desirable, but mine was just gonna be the worst that there was. So we finally arrived there, and I park a little bit closer than everyone else because they had to tell me, when we're about 5 minutes away so I can start hitting the brakes. Even still, I was parked a little bit closer. And we go to this warehouse. We don't see the van, but we know that it's inside. And we assume that this is where they're keeping all the pets. we kind of do a little bit of scouting and we notice 2 goblins. And we think that we can take them, but we want to do this strategically because if we trigger an alarm, there might be a lot more people coming. We all agree on this. Now, there's kind of like big concrete fences around it, essentially, and we take cover behind that. Although it wasn't so much big fences, it was more like it was like 5-foot high concrete, essentially. We were able to kind of duck under it and stay hidden. Now, 2 of us were on one side and 2 of us were on the other side, and we figure, okay, let's take these goblins. Rick had the gun, so he was on the right side, and Gerger had a gun, and he was on the other. I was with Gerger, and Roderick was with Rick. I believe Rick went first. Yes, so Rick went first. He wanted to make this quick, so he just shot a bullet at a kobold. Not at the kobold, at the goblin. He rolled for hit, and he missed. Immediately, the goblins turn around and they start screaming, intruder. They sound, well, there's not really an alarm they can sound, but they are yelling like crazy. And 2 more goblins come out, and all-out fight starts, and they roll for initiative too. Well, I guess we all roll for initiative. Thankfully, when I made the hacker class, it was technically called a technomancer. Like a technology necromancer, I guess. And I did have access to cantrips and 1st level spells, because at level 5, I think we were at level 5. So thankfully I could defend myself with Firebolt. If I didn't have that, I would have been dead. Because in this fight, I believe Roderick went down. Roderick actually didn't go down. He was severely injured, though, almost immediately. And we continue to fight, though. We actually take down 2 of the goblins, and there's only 2 left. But when there's only 2 left, the DM describes how the warehouse begins to open. And we see a massive orc come out. This orc has to be the size of an ogre, or it's at least 12-14 feet tall. We're extremely intimidated by it, but before it even does anything, it describes how, like, almost a fairy-looking thing, very small, flies around it, and some dust falls from beneath it, mutating and transforming this massive orc into a T-Rex. If we weren't intimidated before, we were just scared now. The 2 people with the guns decided to focus on shooting at the T-Rex, while I was casting a firebolt at the goblins. Roderick was just kind of trying to keep himself alive. Eventually, we down 1 of the goblins, but then the T-Rex moves. And he gets a lot closer to us, so we try to hide. Well, I hide, at least. Rick tried to hide, but he failed horribly, but he didn't know it. On the T-Rex's turn, he found Rick, and he just he didn't take a swipe at him, he stomped on him. And we could just kind of see him lying in a footprint. He wasn't moving. And we were all scared, because at least I was, since we had gone way back. Eventually, the T-Rex found Gerger too, and kind of just took a bite into him, and he fell too. Thankfully, he I think he made a nat 20 on his death saving throw, so I believe that means it was 2 successes. At least that's how we play it. So he was fine, but he was still down. I revealed myself from hiding, and I went to take his gun. Thankfully, the T-Rex didn't really notice it, because I, for some reason, kept succeeding my stealth checks. He was about to take down Roderick too. Roderick was on his last hit points, and the T-Rex barely missed. But I tell Roderick out of character what my plan is. I know that's a little bit metagaming, but we were desperate. And he says, okay. And he finishes off the last goblin. What I do is I run to my fallen friend, and I take the gun off of his body. With both guns, I aim at the T-Rex, and I pull both the triggers at the same time. Both of them were critical hits. They went directly through the heart of the T-Rex, and it fell dead. We went into the warehouse, and we found all of the pets. They were all alive. Not exactly healthy, but they were all alive. We called the ambulance and the police immediately. When first of all, the ambulance, they didn't have to do much for Guru because he was fine. But Rick had unfortunately passed away. He was only about 16. It was really sad. I kept the gun we had together. And when I tried to get into my car to go home, one of the stray bullets had hit the door and it completely exploded. So I got a ride home with Roderick. We mourned the loss of our good friend the next day, but we had succeeded in our mission of stopping the black market pet trafficking. And that's the end of this modern day one-shot. I hope you all enjoyed this story. Let me know what you thought in the comments. Give me a like, subscribe. Until next time, roll well.